to another edition of
Tools and Tea Time
On Tuesdays
with Tim and Anna.
Oh, I think I shared the wrong screen.
That's
Trying
all
to be
right.
so slick there, but my multitasking working memory was not doing what I wanted it to do. Okay, there we go. All right, so welcome to Tools of Tea Time on Tuesdays with Tim and Anna. That is tool time. That is like having tea with a friend, except this week it's a Boston tea party because we have Andrew Watson coming in to join us from Boston. So give him a virtual or a real round of applause. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Andrew. We're glad you're here. So as usual, we kind of start off with a socially emotional moment. Christine Carlson said that when you're in touch with your heart, you feel a connection with others and you have access to your wisdom. Of course, that's easier said than done in this crazy world that we call COVID and teaching during COVID. So let's just take a second after a busy day to maybe get grounded and start by just taking a few deep breaths. You're welcome to close your eyes if you like or not, but actually sense your chest right now. What sensations are you experiencing in this area of your body? Allow yourself to relax and breathe deeply and see what you're feeling in the area of your heart. Does it feel sharp or tender, numb, aching? What is the exact feeling that you're experiencing? If this feeling had a taste or a color or a shape, what would it be, what you're experiencing in the area of your heart? And what effect is this doing on your sense of well-being to get in touch with your heart? Okay, I know that sometimes I used to think of a lot of this stuff as very warm and fuzzy, but actually there's a lot of research that shows just like connecting your body with your mind and your heart really helps to make you more open to learning and to experiencing what's going to come next. So hopefully whatever you're feeling, you got in touch for just a second, and I think we will move on. I think I will show you the roadmap for today. So the roadmap for today, we're going to start out by introducing you to this week's theme and to our special guest. Anna, you're on.
Okay, so looks like Rodney's back. We've had the Queen, we had Martha Stewart, we had Chuck Norris, but I think Rodney's still our favorite. And Rodney is our imaginary fan-based letter writer. And he said, Tim and Anna, I'm teaching remotely and my students are complaining that the work I'm giving them feels overwhelming. I want to support them, but it doesn't feel like I am able to get the same amount of work done as we usually do in a day. Any insights? Sincerely yours, Rodney.
Well, Rodney, good question. I think that we're going to let our special guest handle this topic. Our special guest today is Andrew Watson. I think he would probably put these in order, correct me, Andrew, but I think he would first and foremost call himself a teacher. He has many years of classroom teaching. He's also an author. He's the founder of Translate the Brain, which does excellent teacher workshops around the country. He's also the moderator, the editor for the Learning in the Brain blog, which I encourage you all to check out as a great resource about teaching and learning. Andrew does these workshops around the country, and here's an example of what I think those of us who have experienced his workshops, like Adrian and Anna and I would say. Jeff Scanlon sums it up. He says, Andrew can dazzle you with his wit, move you with his anecdotes, wow you with his insights, compel you with his compassion, and disarm you with his empathy. And so, you know, it reminds me a lot of somebody that we just keep hoping will show up on this show some week. A little inside joke for those of you that have joined us other weeks. So without any further ado, let's move on to this week's theme. And this
Uh,
week, I'm sorry, Anna.
that's okay. Well, this week's theme is working memory and remote learning.
Great. And we're going to move to our on down the road to our tool of the highlight of the week. And our tool highlight is working memory support strategies. And some of you may know something about working memory, some very little. So I think it's time to hand it over to our special guest, Andrew Watson, to take it away with our tool highlight. Hi, Andrew.
Hi. Hi. Um, is the screen mine now?
Yes, I will quit sharing, but you should be
Okay.
able to share. Up 1 second. Stop sharing. It's all yours.
There's everybody. Hi, everybody. So I'm really, I'm really happy to have a chance to be here. Tim and I were talking just before we started. I think it was 2014 or 2015 that I first met Tim at a conference, a Learning the Brain conference in New York, and we had a really great weekend talking about memory back then. And I've done several workshops with the museum since then, and I've gotten to know some of you doing those workshops. So I really admire the programs that Tim and his team do. And I'm happy to have a chance to meet several of you and re-meet several of you. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. So let me do my screen sharing here. Okay, we are going to be thinking about working memory, as Tim said, which is a topic which I spend a lot of time thinking about and writing about. And I want to start with an experience I suspect pretty much anyone who's ever taught has had. It's a classroom experience. So here I am, I'm teaching along, I'm explaining my thing. And over in the corner, Fido raises his hand and I say, oh, hang on just a second, Fido. And I finish a sentence or two and then I come back and I say, yeah, Fido, what was your question? And Fido looks a little abashed and says, oh, gosh, I forgot my question. As I say, I think all of us have had that experience as a teacher, and it seems very odd, you know, that you just had that question. It seems bizarre that you've forgotten it. And I think that's the sort of experience that we have seen our students have in online learning to a remarkable degree, that things that seem very simple, we don't quite understand why. You know, I just asked you to click on the link and go to the document and copy the passage and discuss it with your classmates in the breakout room. But even something that's that simple seems to be overwhelming cognitively. And it's a little bit of a puzzle to understand why. So to think about why, actually, I'm going to quit out of this slide here so you can see me. I'm going to start with a quick mental exercise that I'm going to ask you all to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a list of 5 words. And I'm going to ask you to put those 5 words in alphabetical order in your head. So please don't write anything down. Please don't ask Siri. This is cognitive work you're doing here. So the words I would like you to alphabetize are the 5 work days of the week. So in a Western context, that's not Saturday, that's not Sunday. The first one is Monday. So get those 5 words, put them in alphabetical order in your head. And when you've got the answer, use your little reaction button to give me a thumbs up. So I've got a reaction thumbs up. I know you've got it. So, ooh, Nicole's got it already. Wow. Okay, got a couple more thumbs up, a couple more thumbs up. Nolan's got it. Laurel's got it. Laurel. Oh, we've got 2 Laurels. Okay. Is anybody feeling brave and wanting to try? Anybody want to jump in with that? Give me a wave if you want to try that.
Come on, be brave. Show that growth mindset.
Come on, Nicole.
I could do it. I'm Mary Claire.
Okay, thanks,
Okay.
Mary Claire.
Mary
Okay.
Claire, jump in.
Okay. Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. No, Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
There you go, Mary Claire. Friday, Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Boom, there it was.
Give her some jazz hands.
Jazz hands, jazz hands. Okay, excellent work. Let me go back and do my screen sharing again. Okay, so when you were doing that cognitive task, you were using a mental ability that we call working memory. And I'm going to start with a definition. because that's what we do in science. So working memory is a short-term memory system, and there are 4 crucial verbs, and you're going to hear me say these verbs over and over and over again. So working memory does 4 things. Working memory selects, holds, reorganizes, and combines information from multiple sources. So it selects and holds and reorganizes and combines. Select, hold, reorganize, combine. And happily, there's a handy acronym that we can use to keep track of all that. Our friend Shrek is going to help us remember that. So the S stands for select, and the H stands for hold, and the RE stands for reorganize. And I lived in Prague for a year, so just cut me a little slack, and we're just going to go with the fact that K stands for combine, select, hold, reorganize, combine. So here's a picture of that happening. Here's a student head, and our goal, of course, is for information to end up down here in the student's long-term memory. So here I am, I'm the teacher out here, and I've got some sort of mental model in my head that I want my students to get. So I'm thinking about evolution, or I'm thinking about some rules of geometry, or I've got some phonics rules, whatever it is. And what I want ultimately is for this mental model that I've got to end up in my students' long-term memory systems. But of course, I can't just put it there. I can't just enter it in like the matrix or something like that. So what happens is this, that in the student's perceptual system, there are all of these available things out here that the students might select. So they might select, oh, look, it's snowing outside. Or maybe they're thinking about the button on their computer, or maybe they're thinking about the dog that just walked in the room. But what I want is for them to select these particular bits of information that are relevant to the mental model that I have in my head. So I want them to select those bits of information. I want them to hold that information in their working memory. And once they've selected and held, I want them to reorganize that information and combine it into some sort of working mental model. And once they've done that, select, hold, reorganize, combine, with enough practice, they can start moving that simple model into long-term memory. And this is where the magic starts. Once they've done that, and this is in long-term memory, now I can go ahead and ask them to select some new bits of information. These pieces of information are also relevant to this mental model that I've got. And so this is maybe the next day or maybe the next week. This is later on. So I've asked them to select these new pieces of information, and they can also select and reactivate this mental model that they've got in long-term memory. And now they've held, they can reorganize that in working memory and combine it into some new system. And now this updated mental model can move into long-term memory. So of course, this image that they've got here doesn't yet resemble my understanding of it, but that's fine. I'm a teacher. I've been doing this a long time. My understanding of geometry is quite sophisticated. My understanding of evolution is quite sophisticated. So of course I have a very complex mental model, and theirs is quite simple. But you can see that they're getting closer. They're starting more and more to resemble my model. And the more that this process happens, the more that they keep updating this model, the richer their model is, and the more like my model it is. And if you think about this for a while, and you think about, well, what happens in school classrooms that requires students to do this working memory? What requires them to select, hold, reorganize, combine? Well, the answer is everything. If they're learning, they're using working memory. Essentially, no learning happens in the absence of intensive working memory activity. So maybe, singing happy birthday isn't a working memory intensive process, but pretty much everything else that happens in schools requires lots of working memory. So this is the good news we've been talking about so far. So imagine I gave you this list of digits. I said 21404, and I asked you to close your eyes and say those digits backwards. So you're selecting, you're holding, you're reorganizing. That's a working memory task. So it looks like this. You've got things you select, you held, you reorganized. That's what that is. So here's the problem. Imagine instead I give you this string of digits, and I say I would like you to take these and close your eyes and say these digits backwards. And very quickly, you're going to find that here you're trying to take all of these digits and put all of them in working memory, and it's just not going to happen. The system is going to collapse because although working memory is absolutely essential for learning, it's also very small. So to go back to my poor student Fido, the problem is when I said, well, what I want you to do is hold on to your question over here and continue to process and think about what it is that I'm saying, that additional level of mental burden meant he couldn't do both of those things. He couldn't hold this over here and select, hold, reorganize, and combine over here. There just isn't enough space in working memory to do that. And the experience that all of us are having in our online teaching when our students struggle to do really very basic things is that even just ooching up the working memory demands of our work just a little bit because it's happening online means it's gotten much, much harder because we're starting to overload working memory in ways we never knew about because nobody ever told us what working memory was. So our goal is to try and prevent working memory overload. And this is something, when I go to a school and talk with teachers, it's usually a 3 or a 4 hour event. So to do this in just a few minutes, we're obviously moving very quickly here. I just want to introduce for you a couple of quick strategies that you can think about when you go into your discussion groups, and maybe some of these will resonate with you. So I'm going to talk about 3 ways to think about helping students with their working memory burdens. And the first is the core insight that everything that students already have in their long-term memory, they don't actually need to process in their working memory because it's in long-term memory. So everything, every way that we can use what they already know, and every way we can connect the new thing to the thing that they already know, that reduces working memory burden. And I'll give you a famous example of this. So back to this list of digits here. There's a researcher who's working with a guy, and he was trying to see, well, can I, if we practice enough, can I increase this guy's working memory capacity? The student's name was Steve Falloon, F-A-L-O-O-N, Steve Falloon. So they practiced for days and days and days and days and days, and he got a little bit better, but he kind of maxed out at 7, I think. He just couldn't do any more digits than 7. And then after really a lot of frustrating work and he was pretty vexed. He suddenly had an insight because just by accident, it turned out Falloon was really, really, really into track and field. He was a runner, and he knew a lot of records that people held in the world of track and field. So what he started to do is he'd say, well, wait a minute, 21404, that's actually Paula Radcliffe's world record time in a women's marathon. And 13 seconds is actually a pretty good time for a high school 100-meter dash. And this time here is David Rudischer's world record for the 800-meter hurdles, I think. And 6:10 1/4 is Stefka Kvitova's world record for high jump. So instead of trying to remember the numbers, he connected all of this incoming information to stuff that was already in his long-term memory. And because he already had that foundation in long-term memory and connected it to the incoming information, he was able to remember more than 100 digits, more than 100, which is, you know, an astonishing accomplishment. So strategy number 1, how can we use our students' long-term memory to support their working memory processes? By the way, this is why routines are so important. Routines rely on long-term memory. Strategy number 2 is to make information visual. And the headline here is we've been talking about working memory as if it's one thing, but it actually has both visual and verbal components. And of course, the tricky piece here is that schools tend to be very verbal places. We just tend to rely a lot on words. So here's me over here. I'm the teacher. I've got this mental model. And what I do is I say, I want you to process all of this stuff. But alas, when my students try to process it, the first problem is that they're only using half of their working memory because none of it's visual. And when I say those words, they expire immediately. The words have vanished. So that double problem makes this working memory task incredibly difficult. and it's really harder for them to succeed. But if instead of doing that, I give them both the words and a visual representation of what I want them to understand, now, even though those words are still going to expire, I've got a lot more working memory capacity to use. And when the words go away, that visual image is still there, and they can rely on this for their to support their working memory function. I do want to emphasize, teachers tend to take this and go a little bit crazy and make super colorful, super elaborate diagrams. We've got lots of really good research. The simplicity of the diagram is a key piece of it. The simpler, the better. So strategy number 1, use long-term memory. Strategy number 2, use visuals. And strategy number 3 is to trust your instincts. I often find when I talk with teachers, they'll say, oh, well, if that's the working memory problem, is this a good solution? And the answer typically is, yeah, if you think that's likely to work, give it a whirl. So I think at this moment, we're going to break into small discussions. So Tim, am I right? This is your zone?
Oh my gosh, Andrew, knowing how complex this topic is, I'm just so amazed at how you are able to articulate it so well. Thank you very much. And hopefully everybody now has some idea about what working memory is. And so we're going to let Anna introduce the prompt that you're going to have during your breakout community time.
Yes, so when you go and chat with your friends, think about this. Now that you know what working memory is and what working memory overload is, what are your ahas about what's happening in remote learning? And do any of the suggested solutions trigger an idea for you?
Okay, so we are ready to move people over to their breakout rooms. And when you see the invite, just go ahead and hit accept and you'll be there. If you are in room number 5, would you mind, if you see an invite for room number 5, don't accept. Can you just stay here? Because we'd like to have one discussion group on video for those who are watching this later.
For me, I definitely agree that the visual is very important. So when I was teaching for a while about money and numbers, I used actual money like pennies. And so I had something visual and tactile in their hands. And we talked about basic numbers like 1 plus 4 is 5, and just using actual money, pennies in their hand, and they could feel it, and also have a visual and tactile. So that's what I did.
And the tactile, like if a visual and tactile, if they kind of forgot what they were doing, they could look down and they have a physical object to kind of like regroup, and they don't have to go into their memory to try to figure out what they were doing. That's great. Go ahead, Norm.
I think what you said now is really bringing things down to a practical solution to this, because when you're in the abstract, you can't remember. If you bring things down to something that they can relate to, like numbers, you were saying you're using numbers, which is right. So you go one step further and you show them, well, these are the numbers. So you use the numbers to purchase something at the store, but you relate it to something that they're used to seeing or experience every day. And in that way, they will remember things. Also, when you connect as well, so you have to make connections, let's say. Names, for example, if you're taught to remember names, so the same idea is right there. How do you remember a name? For instance, you say to yourself, well, this man that I just met, he had a red tie. And if I see him again, he has a red tie. I know his name is John, let's say, or something of this nature. Maybe it's not a tie, maybe it's his eyes, his hair, etc. But you're connecting that way. Again, it's visual, like what's just said before, which is very, very true. It's visual, it's connection, but it's practical. Where the biggest problem that I always faced in school, and I was a poor student until later I learned how to learn, was to get away from the abstract and bring it down to something that I can feel and touch and see, and then your mind says, aha, it gets into your brain that way.
Mhm. You know, we had a presenter a couple weeks ago, but a lot of teachers are really focusing on this routines thing, that I can use my working memory to do language or to do math or whatever I'm doing if I don't have to remember things like what tool do I need for this and where do I get that, so that they're creating these routines like Beth had a few weeks ago, where when I go home, I got a kit that looks just like the kit I'm using at school. So I know what to do there. You don't have to explain that while I'm trying to think about the math. So I think the more teachers during these times can think about, if they're transitioning from school to home to school, about how they can keep the routines the same in either environment, I think it will really help students' working memories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I agree.
this past week, we were working with taxonomy and how it has changed all the way from Aristotle's time to now that we have 3 domains, etc. Had them do a timeline, and I made them go and come up with a sketch so they could see what each one was presenting. So it's not just a name and what they did, but try to get a sketch with it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's like gain your eyes. You are going to perceive something, you see, yeah. There's also the point that was brought up here. Some people are good at remembering things in a visual sense, and some people don't need that. They could remember things in the abstract. They could remember all sorts of things, and they don't need to see it, you know.
Yeah, it's definitely true that everybody's wired differently, although it is true that humans as a species pretty universally are pretty visual, unless they have a visual impairment. That's one thing that's common. Well, it looks like we have the whole group back. And Andrew, you wanted a second to tie things up before we move to closing out the evening? Go ahead.
Sure. Let me share my screen again, if I may.
Okay, let me quit sharing. Okay.
So what I want to do is conclude with a quick visual representation. And the point of doing this is twofold. The first is, I said to you that visuals are good, so it would be good for me to give you an example of a visual being good. But also, the visual is about working memory and working memory overload. So it's both an example of what I want you to understand and the topic that I hope you understand. So it's both of those things. So I'm going to let, it's a short GIF. I'm going to let it cycle through a couple of times, and then I'll narrate it a couple of times so you can see both pieces of it. So Tim, can you give me a thumbs up? Is my screen sharing again?
Yes, we can see it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. So here's the GIF. So I hope what you're seeing here is that we have a relatively small fixed amount of working memory. So some of it is used for the information, some of it is the way that they process, and the remainder is what they use to understand. So if our teaching is too complicated or the information is very complicated, their working memory capacity overflows and they stop learning. So that's what this image is showing. We've got a fixed amount of working memory. Some of it goes to the information itself. Some goes to the way that we're presenting it. That's internet, by the way. What's left is what they use to understand. So we need to manage these two things in order to leave them room to understand, because if we don't, their working memory system shuts down.
Yeah.
Great visual.
Yeah,
Isn't that great?
thank you, Andrew. Let's give Andrew some jazz hands or claps or whatever you want. Thank you so much. As awesome as always, we appreciate your being here today. It looks like we have reached the end, my friend. Andrew was good enough to put an article in the resources. Here's that tiny URL, and I've also pasted it in the chat for you. It's the place you go every week to look. The recording of today's episode will be up on the DMNS website. If you want to go back and watch that or tell friends to watch it. If you had a good time, we hope you'll invite those friends to join us.
And thanks for spending another half hour with us. And we hope to see you again next week. I'm going to have a friend of mine called Katie Patterud who teaches 6th grade, and she's going to do some awesome argument-driven inquiry remote style for us to look at. So we hope that you come join us.
Okay, and so, like I said, tell your friends if they can want to join us, and also let us know what topics you'd like to see in future episodes. But until then, in honor of our guest from Canada, Norm, see ya. It's a Canadian show, if you didn't know that. All right, so good to have you guys. Thanks for joining us.